Hi, JP. It's good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you too. Really good, really good.
Nice, nice, nice. Um, it's good to have you here. This is going to be a quick little spotlight interview, which is like a new type of content that Marcel and I are going to be pushing out. And we're going to select basically a few topics. And today, the topic of the conversation is going to be the challenges when mapping your payment infrastructure. And well, I guess JP, I'll let you present yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Amazing. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. So, Juan Pablo Ortega, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Yuno. Before starting Yuno, I co-founded Rappi, and one of the biggest issues that we had as we were growing Rappi into 9 different countries was payment infrastructures. We were struggling with payments acceptance, payments approval rates, fraud, enabling all the new payment methods that were appearing each month. And that was the main reason why I started Yuno. And we wanted to create a company that basically simplify how companies were able to manage their payments infrastructure easily without having to do integrations and making sure their developers and their engineers were staying in their core business and not doing things that didn't make any sense.
No, I can speak from experience. I've seen a lot of different merchants struggling with this specifically. So you guys definitely are helping. And I mean, obviously heard quite a few great things, but I guess we'll learn a little bit more about what you guys have done in the space. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Very excited about this one. It's a topic that's actually very dear to me because I feel like in general, building the right payments infrastructure is always a little complicated because it's so unique to each. And having somebody that's ultimately has a solution like you guys that can really be flexible around the way you help the different merchants out there, as well as your partners, I'm sure it's a good place to be. So I guess, help me out a little here before we get started on, the challenges of mapping a payments infrastructure. Can you describe what a traditional, right, payment infrastructure looks like today? Like what before, orchestrators or ultimately companies that could provide flexibility were around, like what does it look like?
Yeah, perfect. So companies used to have only one provider, and also they used to only accept credit cards and debit cards. This was kind of the normal things before. You accepted credit card, debit card, you had one processor, and you forgot about it. Things started to get more complicated because of many different reasons. Number one, companies started to expand out of their home country. So you had US companies going into Europe or Latin America. You had a Colombian company going into Brazil and Mexico. And this kind
Mhm.
of one provider solution wasn't actually working. And it was exactly what happened to us at Rappi. We had one payment provider that worked okay in Colombia. As we moved into Mexico, it didn't work in Mexico, so we had to do a second connection. And what we saw is that we kind of lost that flexibility and
Okay.
having the leverage to be able to move into different providers. Now, we're only speaking about credit cards and debit cards. It started getting a lot more complicated as we
Oh,
started
yes.
seeing APMs. So APMs, alternative payment methods, for those of you that are not familiar with APMs, our payment methods are extremely important in, well, all the different markets, more in emerging markets, but everywhere. Even in the US, you have today
Yep.
Venmo, Cash App, Buy Now, Pay Laters, FedNow, etc. So as we started growing in Mexico and in Colombia and the rest of Latin America, we started seeing that most of the population didn't have a credit card or debit card. We needed to have options for them to pay. This was cash, wallets, also bank transfers, because otherwise we were kind of closing the amount of
Yep.
people that we were able to serve. And this added a lot more complexity because sometimes the payment processor will have this APM, but others you have to go and do a connection directly. So
Yep.
this is kind of where the problem becomes really complicated. You need to have 4 or 5 different payment processors for credit cards. Then you need to do an integration into a wallet. Then you need to do integration into a bank transfer. And you look back and you have spent years and years just doing integrations, and your customers are asking you like, hey, amazing that you can accept this, but you are missing a bunch of different features from your core business because you spend more time doing integrations than actually developing what you're supposed to develop.
Oh, this is very, very interesting. Like, yeah, obviously, so I come from a payment processing background, right? And we've seen that around, and the pace of innovation in the payments industry is insane. What's relevant yesterday might not be relevant tomorrow. And you were talking about emerging markets, like that's very true. But again, right, like at the same time, the ecosystem in payments, I think we talk about merchants, but we should also talk about consumers, right? Their preferences change. And as you said, right, like you can always add a new payment method. Is it the right thing to do? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but you need that flexibility. And so this is why the topic is so interesting, right? So I guess Juan, we definitely learned to a little bit more about your payments background as well, right? Like ultimately you talked about Rappi, right? Like congratulations on this, by the way. Like I have a lot of friends
Thank
in
you.
Latin America and everybody is using it and not just there. So like that's big time. But yeah, I guess payments, is something that you kind of had to accept. And I think we often forget, us specifically that are in the payment space, that payments impacts everyone, right? The topic of payment should not just be related to us, but it should be how can we potentially influence and bring both knowledge and new solutions, right, that can help consumers and merchants out there. But not only that, also like how do we think their way? And so as you were kind of on the side at first of just accepting payments, I guess you had to build quite a bit. Like, I would love to understand a bit more about your background, what drove you to create this new solution. I guess you talked about the problem, but yeah, if you could expand, maybe give some examples, would love to hear. I'm sure there's a few fun stuff in there.
Perfect. Yeah. So, look, it all started because when we started Rappi, at the beginning we didn't have enough couriers. So on the weekends, mostly on Sunday night, when people are relaxing, I had to get on my bike and deliver the orders. And when I went to talk to the users, I was always, now that I'm out talking to them, I'm going to ask them questions. And I was like, hey, thank you for using Rappi. How can we improve? And everyone was like, no, you need to improve your payment system. I added my credit card and it didn't work. And I have money. I don't understand. Your app sucks. And I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do. And this is something that it became recurring. And here is it's
Okay.
kind of funny because you mentioned that is, we live, that we have a very dynamic payment ecosystem, but the reality is that the way we process cards today is the same way that it have been done since like 40, 50 years ago. If you think about it, look, let's say you go back to the 1980s and let's say an alien comes and say, hey, how do you think payments are going to work in 2024? You will say, no, it will be amazing. It will be with my face, with my hand. But no, today we take out a car, we input 16 digits, then expirations, then CVV2, then billing address, then mother's maiden name, social security number. And after you input 20 different things, your issuer decides to decline the transaction. And you're like, you have to be kidding me. I just spent all of this time putting all this information in
That is
decline.
crazy.
So there is definitely a lot of gaps. And this is how I start getting super inside all of this. So Mexico 2015, debit cards were just getting kind of released and open for the card not present transactions, but banks were struggling. So they
Yep.
had random rules. And this is why we had like 60% approval rates because it was like a lottery. So you put your credit card and there is a chance that you're going to win and your payment is going to get approved or not. And this drove me to creating RappiPay, and RappiPay was a wallet that we had inside Rappi because I say, hey, like it's just impossible that it's so hard to pay. Like we're gonna create a better way of paying. And also it was created because of the limitation that existed. So in Colombia, until basically like this week or like last week, you couldn't do partial refunds. You couldn't do authorization and partial captures. You couldn't do anything. You could charge and you can fully
Okay.
refund. So if you order something, let's say you order a grocery list and it's $100, if the supermarkets were out of potatoes and I had to give you back $2, I had to issue a full refund of $100 and charge the card for 98. Issuers can take up to like 15 days to show a refund. So customers were seeing two
Wow.
charges for 2 weeks. They were calling customer service. And that was the reason why we started RappiPay. We're like, okay, we need a way to give people $2 back and they can use it. And RappiPay grew into RappiBank, where we wanted to challenge everything around being an issuer, everything about being a debit card, a credit card. And I was in the two parts. I was a merchant, I was an acquirer, I was an issuer, and I was still having issues. I was like, there is something in the middle of these, all of these networks that they still have a lot of gaps. And We created a bunch of different things, a QR payment system. We're able to improve a bunch of different metrics. But I
Wow.
think this frustration, I think, drove me to create Yuno. And the frustration was, it's crazy that companies are not able to do what they want to do. They have this huge limitation, and it's technology, engineering, resources. If a company wants to use a new payment processor, it should be easy. Why is it so easy to send, a WhatsApp, to do so many things that are so complex, but it's so hard to receive a payment online? And that was the whole reason why got started. It was like, how do we create a technology where we're going to build the payment infrastructure of the future, and we can help any companies handle payments as they want? And today, McDonald's is growing in South America, is increasing the payment method that they have so that more people can use their app. Airlines Aviva Aerobus in Mexico, the biggest low-cost, ultra-low-cost carrier in Latin America, is enabling new payment methods as they open new operations in
Wow.
Colombia and on different countries. So that was how the whole idea started, and kind of that's my experience in payments, and I have been kind of in all different parts of it.
No, that's absolutely amazing. Like, I still think, I mean, I have the privilege to talk to quite a few people in the payment space, right? And have been doing so. Leaders, people that know a tremendous amount, have been in the space for a very long period of time. And, funny enough, a lot of people still don't know how a card transaction works. Those people, they do. But like people that have been around for like 5, 10 years still cannot necessarily know what happens because of how complex it is. Right? You were talking about the fact that things haven't changed, and that's just cards. Like payment method is another whole thing, and I think one of the things that we didn't talk about is the redundancy behind payment methods too, right? Like most people don't. So the fact that you ultimately created a wallet just to do partial refunds, like that to me is also probably another gap, right? That could be talked about, like a merchant needing to create their own payment method, which I think is incredible, by the way, to solve some of their specific need is again one of the topic of today, which is how do you create a flexible and map it payments infrastructure. I think another point that you touched on a little bit, but I would like to expand on is, like a lot of companies are local, but more and more it's evolving into a global economy, right? Like companies want to go into different places. And I think, I'd love your take to better understand, not just in Latin America, I think in a lot of different places. First of all, which area of the world do you see scaling? And because you have those insights. And the second thing is this mapping a flexible infrastructure a local or a global problem?
It is definitely so it's a global problem that requires a local strategy and understanding. And this is where it gets complex because you need to have a global payment strategy, but that strategy changes region by region, in some cases country by country. In Southeast Asia, you need to accept wallets. Wallets are the way
Yeah.
people are paying. In Indonesia, we see most of the people paying with Gojek, with GrabPay, with Dana, with Ovo. Also, you have Alphamart, which is kind of like 7-Eleven where people go pay in cash. But what we're seeing is that
Yeah.
wallets are taking over. Now, we move to the Middle East. Middle East is a region that has so much opportunity. You see
Okay.
huge growth from the Emirates, from Qatar, but then you have countries like Saudi Arabia that are huge and are opening up to international commerce. But now, most people in Saudi Arabia don't have a credit card. They have a debit card that only works in a domestic network. So there are companies that today accept credit card, debit card payments, but they only accept international credit card and debit card payments. So most of the population are not able
Interesting.
to actually access those payment methods, and you need to work locally with the payment network. You have the same issues in Chile. Chile, most of the cards actually don't have acceptance in cross-border operations, and this is something that Uber and different companies used to try to leverage. They were processing payments in Chile from the Netherlands, and then issuers, banks were paying huge fees to the schemes. And the banks are like, I'm going to accept this. If you want to use Uber, you have to connect locally. And this gave the rise to the local e-banks, and all of these merchant or record operators that are able to process the cards locally, repatriating the funds later. So we used to call it 3 different regions, and they all have different things. And this
Yeah.
becomes even more complex as you go into Europe and all the rules around a strong authentication. Then you go into Africa, and each different country has their own different
Oof.
things. In Kenya, you need to have M-Pesa. Um, so you think about this and you start getting like a headache and you're like, okay, I'm a payment person and my CEO is asking me to accept payments globally. I resign. But the reality is that you don't have to do that because there are tools that are helping companies, scale globally, having that local understanding, but without having to deal with doing these developments from their company or with their own teams.
Yeah, I've heard that one, by the way. The hey, I have to add new payment methods and everything. I'm gonna resign. Like, it's actually true. Like, this is not a joke. Like, it's actually real. Like, I've heard this one. People that had, because again, right? Like, adding new providers or new payment method or choosing which ones and why. And first of all, it's very time consuming. Second of all, it's something you have to go back to leadership and ultimately like, get approval for because there will be a cost. And then third of all, most people don't know how to do it. There are not that many payments teams, right? A lot of times the people handling payments are also the ones in treasury, and that's just one small portion of their job. And payments, honestly, is a full-time thing. Chief payments officer should exist. That is a
100%.
thing. We should push for it. Chief payments officer should exist. But
Yeah, but you mentioned something super interesting. And if I go back to 2015, I never thought I need a payments team. We didn't have a head of payments. That didn't cross my mind because you think that payments are like a commodity. You connect someone and you
yeah,
forget about it. But now almost every company, any company that accepts payments online, they have a head of payments, and it has become. And then they have different structures. Sometimes they report to treasury, sometimes to the CFO, sometimes to the CEO, and everyone is kind of making their own rules. But I do see a shift in mentality from companies, and I think at some
yeah.
point we're going to have a chief payments officer for sure.
No, and one more thing that we didn't touch on, right? It's very hard today in the payment space to know if a provider is going to be the right fit for one business or not, right? If you think about it, it's
A
not
great
because
point.
it's a good fit for a similar business that it will be the right fit for mine. And you don't have a way to test, right? If you think about it, unless you do an integration to that company, you can't test it for yourself. And normally you have
Same.
to go through contract negotiations, you have to do due diligence, you have to sell it back, you have to do pricing negotiations. Those, yes, if I have to do those, I'm leaving the company, like first of all.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's another point, right? And I'm sure that you have
that's
your
yeah.
your thoughts on that.
No, that's an amazing point. And look, if you think about it, large companies of any sizes, they will do these RFPs. RFPs will take 6 months, and you back and forward, and everyone promised you the moon and everything. You're like, yeah, we have everything. Our API is amazing. I have X, Y, and Z. 6 months pass, and you choose a winner, and then you do contract negotiation. 3 months pass, you start integration. It has been a year and a half, and you go live. Now that provider that you selected, a year ago is no longer the best provider. There have been like 10 new providers that are better. But you say, that's fine. We did it, let's go. And you go live and everything that was promised is not working. Oh, in Indonesia, actually never mind, it's in the backlog. Or my approval rate is 70%. Oh yeah, we thought it was gonna be 80, but we made a mistake. And you're like, okay, I'm not gonna do this again. And you just stay with the provider because
Yep.
what are you gonna do? Another RFP and all of this, and your CFO is mad, everyone is mad. This is completely different today, and we have a great example of this. One of our customers, InDrive, I love them because they're super open in trying new providers. So a provider comes and
Okay.
say, "Hey, I'm going to give you a new rate," and they say, "Perfect, send me the API keys, and we're going to send you 1% of the traffic tomorrow." And the providers are like, "Oh, well, yeah, like let's sign the contract, let's move forward," and they're able to onboard and have new payment methods, new processors within weeks, sometimes within days.
That's
Sometimes it takes
insane.
longer from the time the provider sends the contract to the time they get back. And look, right away, you do a call with the provider and say, look, your approval rate is here, the other approval rates are here, amazing, I'm going to give you more traffic. Or no, your approval rate is here, go fix whatever you have. And it's an amazing thing because it creates a competition between providers, and where they're basically having meetings with the providers week over week, showing approval rate, showing costs, and it makes everyone better because you're always going to have one better than the other ones. But then the other ones
Yeah.
that are not doing better are improving. They improve, they go up. So it's like a Formula One race. If you look at the time it has been taking the past couple of years. Every year, someone is faster because every year you have so many teams, so many new technologies. The same thing is doing with the payment processor. So who wins? Everyone. The merchant, the consumer, my car is getting declined better. The merchant is able to get better prices. They're able to offer new payment methods. Everyone wins, but you have to change the mindset and you need to have the right payment infrastructure to be able to do that.
No, that's fascinating. And I think something else to touch on is the performance of a company, a provider today, whichever it is, can be a payment method, it can be a processor, acquirer processor, even on the cards, right? Aspect of it, like choosing your programs for issuing cards. Those companies are going to evolve, right? And so they might, on the card side, they might offer new rewards. On the payment acceptance side, they might switch a few things, leverage AI in the backend, whichever it is, and get better. You need that flexibility ultimately to also be able to not just select a processor, but you want to have an infrastructure that enables you to also give some of, because sometimes relationships are very important as well, right? Like those relationships that you've built and that you can trust as well, the time they need to do something that ultimately maybe in 3 months will make them the best option for you. But you need that flexibility to be able to just say, oh, you finally have it? Okay, let's switch back traffic, right?
100%.
And I guess this touches on one of the key things, which is keywords, buzzwords, but orchestration layers, payments orchestration, right? I think those are a buzzword that we've heard quite heavily. I think we touched on it very well. I think you've defined already what it is, but if you want to give it for a quick little second, we'd love to do that. And then touch on a little bit more on data, because I feel like the data flow, right, is also extremely important when you look at a payments infrastructure, right? Ultimately, payments is data, and the AI boom is definitely impacting this. But maybe take a few seconds, describe for the ones that do not know what a payment orchestration or an orchestration layer is, and move on to data afterwards.
Perfect. So a payment orchestrator or orchestration layer is a software that enables you to do whatever you want in terms of payment. So everything that we have talked about regarding testing a new provider, doing A/B testing, sending a percentage to a certain provider, testing a new provider, enable a new payment method is what it enables you to do. So it's a flexible software that just gives you all the powers. You can do whatever you want. Some have more features than others. Some give you 100% visibility in your numbers real time. Some have real time routing and let's say a more drag and drop routing feature, so you can move your payments whatever way. Some have reconciliation, so they're done. So there are just a lot of different. I think it's like a car. Some cars have a manual window opener, some have automatic, some you can control with your phone. You're gonna have the same thing. You have the Tesla of the orchestrator, you have the Toyota Camry of the orchestrators, and they all do the same thing, take you to point A to point B, but some do it better than others. Data is a great, great part. There are two parts here. Number one, merchants didn't have control on their data, and this could be payment credentials, this could be credit cards, this could be aspects, and if they wanted to switch provider, they were tied to that provider because they had 40 million credit cards in their vault, and if they were complicated, and what happens, more. So they didn't have any leverage because, and this is a true story. When we were switching from one provider to the other one before we moved into kind of having this flexible infrastructure, and I called the provider and said, "Hey, provider, I'm not going to say the name, but hey, provider, we have increased our volume 10x, and we need to have a reduction in pricing." "Oh yeah, let me check." A month passed, nothing happened. 2 months, I was really pissed off. I'm calling them. I'm going to turn it off. Weird. They knew I couldn't turn it off because I didn't have anywhere else to go. They had my credit cards. 6 months passed. I moved into this flexible payment infrastructure, and I didn't have to call them. I turned off traffic for 2 days, and like day 2, they call me like, "Oh, something is wrong. We're not receiving traffic." I'm like, "Yeah, you're gonna receive traffic when you reply to my new pricing email," and it completely changed everything. And having that leverage of being able to have control on your cars and your things just have so much power. And the other thing is that companies need to, and something that we do, you have so much data in the response on whether you get
Yeah.
approved or declined, and you need to leverage that to basically retrain the different algorithms that you have to make decisions. So you start seeing how the combination between issuer A and acquirer B and acquirer C, you see different approval rates.
Yeah.
This changes a lot by country. In Mexico, it's crazy. In some countries, a little bit less. But for example, in the US, if you process a Chase card through JP Morgan, you have a better approval rate. And there are many
Yeah.
reasons why that
Honest.
happens. But you need to start seeing that data so you can make those decisions.
No, that's super interesting. Yeah, that's called an honest transaction, which is basically leveraging that network. But for example, the US, there's affiliate debit networks, right? That you can also leverage, right? But if you don't have that data, if you don't know about this, you will never know, and so you'll still pay, the fees of Visa and Mastercard. But you could. This is, I think, optimization, flexible payment infrastructure, and optimization are two things that sort of go hand in hand, are not the same thing exactly. But I think control over your data, that data, as we were saying, right, is everything. And I think we're going to see more people talk about this. I think orchestration of data is going to be super important as well, right? But you need control. You need to own that data, right? You need to have access to it, put it either in a third party or having it in your own vault, ultimately like storing it or database. Not everything has to go into a vault, but at least having control over your data. And what's
100%.
fascinating, I think, is when we look at what AI is doing. So AI is a major topic. I think a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this will be like, AI has been around for a while. Yes, it is, but the applications of AI and the way it can potentially disrupt the industry is going to be incredible. Fraud, acceptance, optimization, again, understanding where to send traffic, right? Like potentially like leveraging this from an insight perspective. There's so much that will be done. But again, you might have the data. If you don't have a flexible infrastructure, right, where you can ultimately send your traffic afterwards, it might be irrelevant. So it's going to be very interesting, in my opinion, and that's a personal, hopefully unbiased, maybe a little biased opinion, which is going to be around, yeah, if the number one thing that you should think about, and not the 15th thing that you should think about, is owning your own data. And ultimately, like that's key to making decisions afterwards. But I guess we can talk about this on a different episode specifically. What
Yeah, there has to be an episode on data for sure.
there will be one. But quick switch. Would love to hear, like some funny stories that you've seen. If anyone kind of stuck with you about like failing at having a flexible payments infrastructure. You gave me a few already, but again, don't name them all at once. You can, I'm sure there's quite a bit, but if there's one that kind of stuck with you, would love to kind of hear it. Like anything funny and that will make an impact. Go ahead.
I think that more than funny, there is a story. We onboarded a merchant, and the merchant was using a provider for a certain APM in a country. And when we started looking at the data, it was that they had like a 40% conversion rate. And we went to them and we say, hey, like 40% seems like a really low number. Like, are you sure this is right?
Yeah.
They say, no, it's the standard. And it's funny how people have different standards and they say, no, the number is okay because we talked to our provider and the provider says that is correct. So we say, perfect. Why don't we do an A/B testing? Send 50% of traffic to provider A that has 40% and let's 50% of traffic to provider B to see what happened.
Yeah.
We waited for a week and it turned out that provider B had 70% conversion rate. And that's when I say, well,
Wow.
I think we have a new standard. And it turned out provider A that have been having this for the past 2 years had an issue that no one knew that issue was happening. And we were talking to the providers. The provider was talking to his provider. But we
This is
had to
insane.
do this A/B testing to actually show it. Funny enough, 3 weeks after they fixed it and they both got level. But if they didn't have Yuno and they were able to do this A/B testing, they would have never find out because the provider was like, yeah, that's fine. And this happens all the time. We had another provider in Colombia running three different providers, and one of the providers had 10% lower approval rate, and it was because of this random message. And they were and the wallet is a wallet, and they were like, no, 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 the information is correct. Users are clicking cancel, and I'm like, doesn't make any sense that in 33% of the sample, 10% more people click cancel. Like, why would that happen? Turns out they back and forward 3 months I was showing data, they found an issue. They had an issue in something they were doing and they fixed it and now they go that level. So comes back to data flexibility. You find out that you're losing money that people say that is normal. And look, when something is normal is when you have those two things to compare it. Otherwise, like no one is really going to know. And
That's funny. I think maybe you should change the tagline of Yuno. You should say Yuno, the solver of payment processors, right? Like
yeah.
ultimately, let me find your issues for you, because apparently you don't just help merchants, now you help payment processors too. So this is very interesting. I love it.
Yeah, and then look, I think we're talking about the dynamics of payments in Latin America and in emerging
Yeah.
markets, and this is something that I was about to post in on LinkedIn, but I think you're gonna hear it first here. Um, you start seeing a lot of trends as you walk in the street in terms of payment methods, and you saw in China how in a couple of years cash disappeared and everyone was paying with WePay and Alipay. And you start seeing like first of all you have kind of the e-commerce and you have the stores, then you have
Yep.
the kind of the less informal stores, and then you have people in the street asking you for money with a QR code. And like 2 years ago I was walking in the streets of Buenos Aires, and then this woman approached and she said, oh, can I please have money? And I was like, look, I'm really sorry, I don't have any cash. And she took out a QR code. She said, don't worry, you can send me a Mercado Pago. And I was like, wow, this is where we are right now. Where like Mercado Pago is becoming the way of people paying in Argentina. And
This
you
is
looked
insane.
at the numbers, and it's growing a lot. And most of the people are receiving and asking for payments in Mercado Pago. So as you walk in the street, you start seeing certain trends that as a payment director guides you on what kind of payment method you must have in your payment stack.
No, this is insane. By the way, I hope that you ultimately paid her, because like that is incredible.
I
Something similar
actually,
happened to me.
the funny thing that I was just visiting, I didn't have Mercado Pago, but I was gonna go to the ATM with raw cash to give her because I was like, wow, this is hustling to the best.
No, but it happened to me actually. Similar, but it was Venmo. It was in the US, but yeah, somebody was asking and said, yeah, I'll take Venmo. And somebody else in Lebanon. Lebanon is a very different topic, and a country that ultimately has some difficulties with their banking system, unfortunately. But not exactly the same thing. But they're like, yeah, we accept all currencies. Just give me any currency, I'll take it. I was like, okay, interesting. So, you that's when you start understanding that the power of payments.
But look, there is an example of this in today in Venezuela. Today in Venezuela, you pay with
Yeah,
Venmo, with
Bitcoin.
Zelle. It's easier to pay with a US Zelle account or Venmo than with
Yeah,
even Bolivares. So you see this around the world and how these cross-border payments happen even when you're buying a fruit in the street.
I guess we'll talk about cross-border payments another time. That's another topic that we'll touch on. But look, Juan, this was so fun. So I guess, what's next for you? Is there anything that you haven't really touched on that you want to talk on, and then we can wrap this up?
Yeah, no, we're investing heavily in creating the next generation of payment infrastructure, and this is having all the different features that the schemes have, having the latest payment token and network tokenization, having the latest payment authentication with 3DS 2.0, and all the new features that are coming out between issuers and also merchants. We also are helping banks and different financial institutions create a better payment infrastructure so the payments can flow easier and you don't have chargebacks. You can authenticate easily. The user is able to pay with one click. A good example of this is helping NuPay have more merchants that are accepted. So really soon, Rappi is going to have NuPay, and NuPay is an amazing way of paying. It's one
Okay.
click, it's secure, you can tokenize it. It's kind of the utopian payment method, and we're working together to have that integration, and like merchants are able to turn it on with one click and without having to wait months of integration.
Wow. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to check that one out. Thanks for the tip. If nobody has, you check both NewPay and Yuno, because Yuno is definitely one of those organizations. So congratulations, Juan, on this. Again, this was fun. This was, Juan and myself having a quick little conversation in chat about how to map, well, how to face and the challenges related to having a flexible payment infrastructure and how to map it out. I think if anyone ultimately wants to, you know, hear a little bit more about this, I highly recommend reaching out to JP. And yeah, this was a good one. Thanks for your time, man.
No, thank you for the invitation. It was a really cool conversation.
Have a good one.